Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 636, Camelot 3000, part 1 of 2. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the whatnot, the Duke of the Sultan of Strategery, the indestructible bridge-defying, is wondering what reincarnated knight of the round table he is. So says the sensei of the whatnot and elder statesman of the podcast, Segulin.
How's it going, eh?
Jim, on this episode, we're going to be talking about the awesome Camelot 3000 issues 1 through 6, and the first of a two-part look as we celebrate 16 years of podcasting. So, buddy, that time flies. We are sponsored, as always, by DCB Service and InStockTrades.com, and we want to do a special shout-out to DCB Service and InStockTrades.com. As I mentioned, it's been 16 years of podcasting, and DCB Service and InStockTrades.com have been supporting us, quite frankly, for most of it, and they support quite a few of other podcasts out there. Podcasting, especially when you're doing niche podcasts like, Jim and I do, is not a moneymaker, and you don't enter it to be a moneymaker. We've been very fortunate over the years that we've done this podcast to have great sponsors like DCB Service and InStockTrades.com supporting our show and helping to offset our costs of doing this podcast. So I want to thank both companies for a continued support of this podcast. And with that, Mr. Segulin, and our anniversary, what kind of a podcast are we?
Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast. We go in depth into plotline, story twists, and whatnot of Camelot 3000. So, if you haven't read the series, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
I figured there's going to be some form of additional singing associated with this. Let's talk some comics.
Nothing like the handy-dandy electro-claw for carving through metal doors.
Our main discussion this episode is going to be of Camelot 3000 by Mike W. Barr and Brian Boland, the writer and artist respectively. Bruce D. Patterson is the inker on chapters 1 through 6, which we'll be discussing today. Tatiana Wood is the colorist, John Costanza on letters, and the original series cover art is done by Brian Boland. Continuing Legends chronicled by Sir Thomas Mallory. Jim, initial impressions of this one. It's an 80s book, and it's something that neither of us have read before. So what were your initial impressions of Camelot 3000? Did you like it?
Well, here's the thing, and I don't know if you know this, but I am a fan of the Arthurian legend. I absolutely love all the stuff with the Knights of the Round Table and just the various stories and variations on it and whatnot. And so I was kind of surprised that I'd never read this story, and especially because when you first told me about this, I had this notion in my head that it was the DC superheroes as the characters of Camelot. I wasn't thinking that it was the actual Camelot, characters or even the reincarnation or any of that stuff. So before even starting reading it, I had this storyline: who would be Arthur, who would be Lancelot, Guinevere, all these different stuff playing in my head. Who would be the different characters? And so then when I started reading, I'm like, oh no. This is just Arthur. I'm like, oh, cool, So that, so it was a weird thing going into it, thinking one thing, then starting reading another thing. But short answer, for a very long explanation, I absolutely love this story. I really enjoyed this. For me, this is a really good, solid Arthur story. I love the fact that we get the character flaws that all the different characters have, and that's one of the things I love about just the whole fall of Camelot story. I kind of always like the stories that focus more on the rise of Camelot, just because I'm a happy ending kind of guy. But the fact that we get these, you see these moments where and there's times when you want to jump in the page, or when you're watching a movie, you want to jump on screen and just give someone a quick smack in the head. Say, "What are you thinking? You're a knight. You're not supposed to do this." And I got those same kind of reactions and feelings on this. So for me, this was one of those really solid Arthur stories.
The thing that I really loved about it is it's really a critical piece of this. Like you, I'm a big fan of Arthurian legend. I've always been a fan of fantasy literature. And then when you have something like Arthurian legend, which is based off of historical happenings, where there are, and it's always the piece of how much of the Arthurian legend is true, when does it start skirting into fantasy, and it's that's always been that tricky balance, and also when did it actually take place, if there are real events associated here, and who really was, if there is an Arthur, who really was Arthur in history. So when you're doing this, we have certain things we know about the characters. We know about Arthur. We know about Excalibur. We know about the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, Guinevere, the relationship with Lancelot, all of those types of pieces. When you're going to take these characters and say, okay, part of the legend was the fact that at some point in time it was prophesized that Arthur would come back. Well, let's do a story about that and set it in the future, which is the point of Kent's Camelot 3000. This was a really cool exploration because of the fact that the characters felt very much like reincarnated versions of these characters. So they immediately felt familiar if you're a fan of the Arthurian legend. If not, they bring you up to speed on what you need to know about Arthurian legend organically throughout the story. I'm a big fan of stories that do this. This was one of the early maxi series. It wasn't like we're very used to nowadays, these idea of these long 12-issue miniseries. Where this is also unique, too, is this was in an era where they were doing a lot of experimentation with the newsstand market and the direct market. This was a direct market release, where this was the only way to get this was in comic shops. At least at the time, or at least in my local area, was the only way. I don't remember if these type of things were then going to bookstores as well, because there was that, what is considered direct market. But I do know, like, for me, it was comics and collectibles. It was at Shoregate Shopping Center, and that was the place to get books like this. I remember seeing this on the shelf. I wanted to read it. I had no budget to read it. Like you, I'm kind of wondering, like, why I've never read this, because I love Arthurian legend. This is right up my alley, and that was really what drew me to it for this. We tend to do unique stories for our anniversary shows as kind of a nice little landmark, and like to do something a little meatier, and that's why I wanted to do this one, because it's something very different than anything that we've really done on the show before, and 16 years into this podcast, why not hit something like this? Wow. I'm going to say this, for myself, and it didn't feel dated at all. I'm a big fan of Brian Boland's art. Brian Boland was the artist on Killing Joke, but I'm underselling him by just limiting him to Killing Joke, which was obviously a legendary story, a Batman story. But having Brian Boland on this with the great Mike W. Barr, who's really a writer I don't know that we've talked much about on the show, an incredibly talented writer from that era. We've got this story that, for me, really held up. Really held up. What about for you? Did this story hold up? What did you think about it?
Well, it's funny. It held up. I really enjoyed it. So that's a good solid thing. But here's the thing with me, the artwork, and this is going to sound like a bad thing, but I'm not. It is kind of dated for me. This is 80s artwork. This is the kind of stuff that I remember when I was reading, comics, and the artwork that I really enjoyed when I was a kid. This is that kind of art style to it. This is that, that classic, comic book, art, but it's not, but modernized kind of, it has the really neat details on the face, and it has that etchings, to give really good facial expressions, and, but it still has that, that classic look to it. This was kind of like that era, when we were reading, when we were first really solidly reading comics. This is that era artwork, and I always go back to this artwork, and I always see this artwork, and I say, oh, that's from the 80s. I can see it, and part of it isn't even just the artwork. Some of it's the coloring, some of it's the way the backgrounds are set up, and all that. So for me, it is dated, but not in a bad way. This, this looks like some really good stuff. And because again, it is beautiful artwork. This is amazing artwork, and you could very easily take. I'll be honest with you, you could take this and plop this in a modern story, and I'd be fine. Or you could take like a modern artist and plop it in there and redo it, and I'd be happy with it either way. But this is some solid stuff. Especially one of the things that really did surprise me is how risque they were willing to go, how contemporary they were willing to go on some of the stuff. And I'll be honest, I don't remember this kind of stuff some of the stuff here being talked about and being shown in comic books back in the 80s, at least the books I read. I don't really remember seeing some of this stuff. So for me, those were some neat kind of stuff going through that when I was reading it.
Did you go to comic shops in the 80s? Or how did you get comics?
There was some comic shops, a lot of newsstand, a lot of just whatever I could get my hands on, yard sales, garage sales, that kind of stuff.
And the reason why I'm saying that is to the point of what you're going with as far as stories taking on a more mature tone. A lot of those you found more at the comic shops than you found at the newsstand. And I think some of that was trying to make the newsstand a lot more accessible to the general public, including kids. Whereas you could do some more mature stories and put them on the comic shops. I mean, I tend to find stuff like this. I mean, this is an example of something. This was a direct market release.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that was perhaps the distinction. I do question myself back then. I remember shops like Walden Books and stuff like that having comics. I'm trying to remember if you found direct market books like this, because not every one of them carried a comic selection, and even how often they carried comic selections. Remember there was like periods where you go into a bookstore and you didn't find a single comic in the shop?
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden we had, like, not spinner racks, but we had like wall racks, like magazine racks with comics. Yes. And then you would have, as time went on, we had more trade collections. But that wasn't always the case. So I'm trying to remember time placement-wise if this was something that I exclusively saw at comic shops. And I think it was.
Yeah, see, and with me and hanging out and regularly going to comic shops really didn't happen until, our senior year of high school and college.
Yeah.
So that would be 89 and 90. So I went into a comic shop every so often back then, but it was more of other places where I got the comics. I wasn't regularly going into the shops, or I did a lot of borrowing comics, when, especially throughout this period, this time frame, I was borrowing comics from people. You find out who of your circle actually reads comic books, and there wasn't, again, when we were kids, with us, with my crew and the people I hung out and knew, it wasn't too openly discussed that you read comics. It was one of those, oh, you read them? Yeah, me too. Oh, cool. Hey, I got this. Oh, thanks. And it was kind of like I was more of a borrower than a lender, because, budget wise, I did not have a lot of free income for it. But I had a couple guys that I knew who, I had my X-Men connection. I had my, those X-Men, those some Captain America, Fantastic Four, were some of the books I was borrowing periodically, and I was regularly borrowing those kind of books, and that's actually how I then eventually started saying I'm going to get this title, and I would attack a title and like this is now the title I would go after, and then in college I started shifting again, again, and I was hanging out at the comic shop, because. My buddy Hoach from BG, he worked at the Young's Newsstand, which was the comic shop in one of the comic shops in BG, and used to go there, hang out with him. He's like, "Hey, give this a read. I think you'll like this." And he introduced me to John Stewart. He's like, "I think you'll like this Lantern." I'm like, oh my God, this guy's awesome, So it's that kind of stuff where, really I started evolving my reading, and taking a look at stuff, and even nowadays, especially now, I'm like, "Ooh, that looks good. I'll buy that. Oh, let me get that." And I got a bunch of books that I still have to read.
So it's funny with the artwork when you're talking about how it's dated. To me, it's more classic, and what I mean by that is, I wouldn't want to see this done by a modern artist, somebody today. It's Brian. I want to see Brian. I want to see Brian Boland's art. And that's kind of, when we were talking about doing this story, part of my excitement of doing it was very much the writing of Mike W. Barr. And just as important to me was the artwork of Brian Boland, being able to see this. Because these are their page. I mean, I've seen these covers. That's it. I've never read this story. So the covers, I remember seeing them on the newsstand and the comic shop shelves. That was like a candy store. You'd walk through and be like, oh, I wish I could get that. I wish I could get that. And you just knew that, the covers were, I saw so many covers of things that I wish that I had the budget, to the point of budget, to read. I distinctly remember this. And it's funny all these years later to be able to go back and read this story and see it. I'm looking at the cover for issue number 1. And it's that great cover with Arthur on the front, and behind him Merlin is kind of like shadowing over him. And you see aliens
yeah,
and invading spacecrafts, and our first glimpse of Tom, who winds up being a very important character, the nondescript Tom. As we jump into the past and future king. What did you think about the alien invasion backdrop? Because that was something for me. I knew it was going to take place, obviously with Camelot 3000, the idea would be the year 3000. I didn't know what the premise was going to be, other than I was guessing there was going to be some kind of futuristic piece. We see this world that is being invaded by aliens, and humans aren't doing so well at this time.
Well, and I'll tell you, that was something that initially threw me. Like, what? Aliens? Mm-hmm. Wait a minute. And it kind of it did take me a minute to get my hands on it. But one of the things I really loved about the series is they later on explain why Earth would be so vulnerable to an alien attack. And we later learned exactly why the aliens chose that time to attack Earth. And I love the fact that we get this initial story of an alien invasion, but then there's more behind it. More behind it, like how it's society, how society turned its back on the space program. So they weren't really reaching out and developing their space tech and all that. And they're dealing inwards, and just the consumption of the planet. I mean, it's funny just looking at how they really go into just, things are not looking good on the planet in London, not including the alien invasion, not even including the alien invasion. They've got a lot of issues. I love how the fact that we have this alien invasion, but that's not the beginning. That's not the only problem. There's all these other stuff. And again, that's just a great storytelling in how they hit you with the one and then they build on it. And it was something that, again, it's one of the things that made this story, again, so readable right now.
Yeah.
So contemporary now, because we are still talking, we're talking more heavily about environmental impact. We're talking more about, how, issues, how issues affect the world, and we look at stuff like this with wars affecting the entire planet, and how just, everything, we're not just separated. We're not just one little corner of the world. Everything's interconnected, and we're, really starting to see that nowadays. This is back in the 80s, and I do remember when environmental issues were first really starting to get talked about in the 80s, and they were quickly dismissed as being nothing. Come on, that's not, what do you mean recycle? What do you need that for? And things like that. I remember that stuff as a kid, so reading this going, oh, wow, that's cool. They're playing off, I'll see, if you don't do it, this is what's going to happen to you. And they're kind of right, it did happen.
Tom's story is very interesting because we kick off with that, and I was like, well, okay, where's Arthur going to come into this? And I was engaged in this story where it's him and his mom trying to escape what's going on, and his mom and his dad, I should say, and he loses both of his parents and doesn't really have a chance to react to it because it's like, you got to run, you got to survive and keep moving. And he finds a place to hide out, but it's very clear that the aliens have a pretty good idea where he likely is. One of the things that I think really worked about this initial issue and initial couple issues, they do a really good job of establishing what the year 3000 is like in this world, this universe that they're crafting here. We got Jules Futrell, who I love, who he turns out to be later. Yeah. And let's just go there. He's gonna turn out later to be Lancelot, but at this point he has no clue who he is reincarnated to be. But you get this idea of this guy who he's done very well. He's ambitious. It's everything we you can kind of see how it's funny knowing that he's Lancelot and rereading the story. You take a look at that and go, I can see how that guy could be really Lancelot with his success rate and, the fact that he's handsome and he's well known and, and yet he's noble and wants to do things, wants to help people and feels frustrated when he feels helpless because he's not used to feeling helpless. He's used to taking charge of situations and, being an overachiever. Very, which I don't say that in a knocking way. He excels at things, and he when he's in a situation where he's not able to use his talents in a way that's beneficial, it's frustrating for him. I really love seeing that in the context of knowing who he is.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing: I thought it wasn't going to be reincarnations of the knights. Mm-hmm. I thought it was just going to be modern versions of these different people. So I'm thinking that Lancelot here, Futrell is going to be the Lancelot role. I immediately knew that.
Did you really?
Of the whole French thing. Yeah, because of French. Because he's French.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why, because Lancelot's of the knights, Lancelot was the only one from France. And just like I was wondering if Tom was actually going to be Arthur.
Oh.
Because, I was thinking he runs into, because he's going into Glastonbury tour, and they're like, it's the home swathed in magic and mystery. And I'm like, he's going to find Excalibur. He's going to find the sword and the stone, and he's going to pull it out. He's going to become Arthur. And that's what I was thinking initially, and I was like, oh my God, that's going to be kind of neat. So I was thinking it was going to be people nowadays assuming the mantles of the different characters, not actually reincarnations, versions of them.
Because Arthur and Merlin were on the cover with Tom.
Right.
That's why I wasn't thinking that. And I'm not, actually, it's interesting. I think sometimes we all walk in with like certain expectations. I think because of the cover, myself, and this isn't saying you're wrong for feeling the way you did, I wasn't thinking that Tom was going to be anything other than who he was as we were introducing, because he was on the cover as himself and Arthur was there as well. So I guess I was more wondering when he was going to meet up with Arthur, not if he was going to become Arthur. Now, to your point, as far as him becoming something, I was wondering if he would become a knight, not one of the original knights, but if somehow Arthur would knight him, or, Arthur would train him, or, be some kind of a sidekick to Arthur. I felt like a lot of this was purely me going off, taking the cover very literally.
Yeah.
More than anything else. There's no right or wrong to it. It's just interesting how sometimes your perspective will change. I loved that bit, though, where he finds basically the tomb of Arthur, opens it up, and last thing you expect is some dude to pop out.
There's something I loved about this scene.
Mm-hmm.
When the aliens are following him,
mm-hmm.
And they show him shining a light, and they can see his footprints. That's how they were able to follow him. And even he thinks, how can they'll never find me. I know these things like the back of my hand. Oops, I got lost. But he's like, he's surprised that they followed him. Well, they followed you through using the tech. And I love that was just a nice little subtle thing.
Yep. Nothing
too major. But again, it shows how the alien tech shows what they're doing. And right along with you, I love the fact that when he finds the tomb and he opens it. And again, I was thinking, okay, here's where he finds Excalibur. And then I see a hand. And I'm like, then I see Arthur pop up. And I'm like, okay, that's actually Arthur. Oh, nice.
And seeing him immediately leap into battle, he sees the aliens, obviously as somebody who comes from a world where magic is a thing, he wasn't too taken aback. So he recognizes that they're foes, he recognizes that there's an issue, takes Tom's weapon, or takes what Tom would carry around with him for defense, and he's holding his own. I loved the action sequence of this, because what you're seeing right away is that Arthur's pretty formidable. And even the gun, he picks up, and he's kind of recognizing from what the aliens are doing, how to adapt. And that's going to be his first experience with a gun. But he saw the alien use it that way, so ended up taking advantage of it. And he's like, you know what? He said, I'm tempted to keep this, and why not? Because, he certainly doesn't need it anymore. Great sequence of events. The other thing that I really enjoyed from this is it lets us know some details as far as he was injured and still has the scars from his injury. So he wasn't just like, he didn't just like die or anything like that. He was resting and, through magic was recovering from his own wounds from back in his day. There's a guy waking up who doesn't really have an idea of how much time has passed. Just that he's up, his home's being invaded, and he's got work to do right now.
Yeah.
He hasn't really even had a chance to process what's happened to him.
Or the fact that really that it's the year 3000 and all the changes that have happened. And it's again, the old part of the Arthurian legend that Arthur would return one day, when England needs her. And I always love the fact that how people say that Winston Churchill was the reincarnated version of Arthur to save England, from the Nazi invasion and all that. And I always love that part of it. And the fact that, Arthur here is back, and the first thing he's doing, he's opening up a can of people who's attacked. This is my country. These are my people. I must protect and defend them. I will fight for the weak. And I love those kind of stuff when it comes to Arthur. And even just when he and Tom are going to the spaceship, he's like, how are we going to get around them? We're not. And he went through them, throws the staff into one guy and shoots the other one. I'm like, yeah, Arthur.
One of the cool parts of the sequence was like when they're escaping in that ship. We've got that ship, and Arthur keeps calling it the vehicle.
Yeah.
I loved the sequence where he was asking Tom, can you basically harness this thing? Can you fly and guide it and that type of thing? And Tom's explaining it to him, like how it works, just very simple explanation. And Arthur's like, I get it. Let's go. It's time to get moving. He's taking leadership, and let's move along. I thought it was just a really cool sequence because it wasn't Arthur just playing around or anything like that. He was paying attention to Tom's explanation of how it worked. And Arthur trying to learn and adapt to the world. It was kind of cool when you see him being like this strategic leader, like where, he's not some dolt. There's an intelligence to him, and he's just trying to adapt to what's going on around him.
Yeah, Arthur is anything but a reluctant leader.
Yeah. No, yeah. It's kind of like we need to keep going.
Yeah.
Commander Acton, I did not see that going where it did either. Because at this point, I'm all into the fact that, okay, the real Arthur's here. So I did not know if we were going to be getting the Knights of... I knew we were going to get Merlin from the cover. I thought Tom was Tom going to become a knight? I didn't know what was going on there. Commander Acton, I kept wondering, is she going to be an enemy? Is she going to be a friend? What was going on with her? I was not thinking she was going to be Guinevere.
And I'll be honest with you, I was. Because
really?
Remember, at this point in time, I'm thinking, okay, I'm still not thinking reincarnated knights. I'm thinking these different people will take on the roles of. So I was thinking, so then with Tom no longer being Arthur, okay, he's going to take the role of one of the knights. Okay, so that's one of the Knights of the Round Table. So wait,
hold on for 1 second. I'm cutting off because I'm cutting off before you go into this because
right.
So I want to talk about before you go into this. So seeing Arthur. Right. And Arthur coming out of his grave.
Right.
You were still, and I'm not knocking you. Yeah. I'm more trying to understand the thought process here. Because for me, Arthur being there and actually being the Arthur from that time did not have me thinking that, at least right now, did not have me thinking that any of these people were necessarily going to be and I was wrong. Obviously, they were all reincarnated. I was thinking he was going to pick up either a band along the way or whatever, or they might find other sarcophaguses with like the knights or Merlin or whatever was going to go on. I was kind of like at this point content. So I took her as being Commander Acton, and that was who she was going to be. And I wasn't even sure if what side she was on in this whole scenario. You were though already placeholder. I mean, and rightful, and you were right. Yes. So you knew Lancelot was Lancelot. You knew this one was Guinevere, even though Arthur was the original Arthur.
Right. And again, as I said, I was thinking Tom would be Arthur.
Okay.
And then when we see Arthur, I'm like, okay, he's not. So I was still thinking Arthur, and I was still thinking the other guy was going to be their version of Lancelot. And as soon as she pops on the screen, first person that popped in my head was Guinevere. And I'm thinking, okay, so now at this point in time, I'm thinking, okay, what's going to happen is Arthur is going to, meet up with the Americas. He's going to fall for her, but she's going to fall for the Lancelot. So we're still going to have that love triangle. I wasn't thinking the reincarnated energies would go into these different people. I was still thinking that, Commander Atkins was going to be her, and Arthur would probably call her Gwen just to, and just kind of like keep that going along, and just call the other guy, refer to him as his Lancelot and this and that. And I was thinking he would call them by their names, but I wasn't thinking they would actually be those people. The notion of full reincarnation for the knights hadn't entered my head yet. I was still thinking the people of this time period were going to assume the different roles. Even though he does mention, let's go get Merlin. And, well, by the time when we get to Merlin and we start seeing that stuff, that's when I start realizing, okay, that it's reincarnations. Oh, neat,
So you didn't think she was classic Guinevere. You thought she was the future.
I thought she was who she was, but she was going to have the role
of Guinevere.
It's kind of like in a soap opera. The role of Guinevere is now being played by Commander Acton.
So you thought Guinevere and Jules would get together, but it was going to be Guinevere and Acton were going to get together. Arthur was going to fall for Acton, but ultimately Acton would have this affair or romance with Jules.
I was thinking that's how the story was going to play out.
Got it. I could see that. So Stonehenge was cool. It was cool to see him go to Stonehenge, especially with the fact that we've had this future where at this point there hadn't been things that were directly identifiable. But, some of the things like Stonehenge were components where, that's not going to go anywhere. But I love how Tom's talking about the fact that was going to be torn down at one point, and somehow the workers were stopped, and somehow things didn't work. And Arthur's laughing at the whole thing because he knew it was all magic driven. And
it was all Merlin.
I loved how that played out, where he knew a whole thing that was going on there. And we get to see this whole magical piece with Merlin. The one thing I really loved about this version of Merlin and how you remember the movie Excalibur, and I'm sure you saw that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The
Merlin in that was creepy. You know what I'm talking about. He had that like creepy, pretentious, kind of element to him. This captures a lot of that in this particular Merlin. I'm not saying he's a direct clone of that version, but you know what I mean? Where it's kind of like, I get why Arthur goes to this guy for advice and uses, his magic and stuff like that. But he's also not particularly kind and nice to Arthur, or respectful even, in his presentation. He's still kind of a pretentious jerk.
He's a bit of a jerk there, and and again, I like that. Again, like you, I thought that was a cool version of Merlin, and it's it's weird. I kind of go. Sometimes I like the stories that have no magic.
Yeah.
And then there's times where I really like the stories that have the magic. It all depends on, depends on the story being told. So with this one, it was kind of neat, especially since we have Arthur surviving, or he was in his suspended animation while he healed. So magic is definitely part of this world. So if we're going to have magic, let's go all in. And we're going to have Merlin be some really powerful wizard. So we got to have that. And I like that. And again, the explanations on that Merlin built Stonehenge and he protected it with his magic. And that's the reason Stonehenge never got tore down, which kind of, was kind of a neat thing. But even then, just when they're starting and Arthur's like, hey, you know what I need? I need my blade. I need Excalibur. And as soon as I read that, I'm like, oh yeah. And it was a really cool moment because again, you have Arthur, we've got Merlin, now we're going to get Excalibur. And I was really curious how they were going to do the Lady in the Lake and just where is the final resting spot of Excalibur.
I love that Merlin knew who Tom was. Listen, guys, of course I know who Tom is. I engineered all this. I thought that was a great sequence of events, too.
I questioned whether Merlin actually did engineer it, to be honest with you.
Oh, well, here's the thing, and you'll never know the answer to it.
Yeah, you will never know the answer. Part of me thinks that Merlin is just doing the, how Scotty from Star Trek used to do. Oh, yeah, I got that. Right. It's just, he's just saying, oh, yeah, I knew, of course I knew. You didn't know. You have no idea who that guy was. Come on.
Merlin's going to be one of those guys that, like, I think you always have to wonder whether or not Merlin's telling the truth about pretty much anything that he does.
Yep.
So, interesting sort of story that we've got here with this. The Lady in the Lake, I thought was an awesome piece because they're at this nuclear plant, and, Tom's even like, why are we here? Arthur's just kind of going along for the ride. And the reason why we're there is because it's a location of where the sword was thrown. I loved the whole handling of the Lady in the Lake. Because, actually, back to the point of Excalibur, it reminded me very much of what you saw in the film. And it's kind of its presentation there. Almost the music from it was playing.
Is playing in your head, when you see it. When it rises up from the water. There was a dun-dun. Excalibur. Yeah. And again, I cheered, as I'm reading through these sequences, when he pulls it up and, the sword starts going to him, and Arthur reaches out his hands and it disappears. Like, wait, where's my blade? What the heck, And the look on Merlin's face is, you could tell Merlin, once again, is being Merlin. He's being a bit of a jerk, but there's a reason behind it, and it wasn't just Merlin being difficult. There's more to the story. And I love the fact that why he did what he did, why he didn't just let the sword pop in Arthur's hands. He knows, what's going on in the world. So it's kind of a neat thing there.
Well, I love that it's a centerpiece for the United Nations, the General Assembly, and to see it pop up there, it was a great way to end off the first issue. I love the cover for Chapter 2. And kind of seeing what that piece looks like. These covers were really gorgeous.
Big time. Big time.
Brian Boland artwork is great. The cool thing about issue 2 as it opens up was seeing the actual engraving on the side of the...
Yeah.
Whoever pulls this out of the stone will be the king of all of England. I mean, that's really cool.
Well, again, I liked how, the fact that it had to... go there, and they're showing just the world is watching the sword. The world is watching, and this is why Merlin did this. He needs everyone to see Arthur. He needs everyone to see Arthur pull the sword from the stone. He needs that, uniting moment of this is the king. And it's kind of a cool, usage of, because everybody in the world knows the sword and the stone. Everybody knows that, and it's, even if you don't know the story, all the stories and all the details of Arthur, you know that part. And that was a really cool notion, a really cool common ground. And even they show how the world is just staring like, oh my God. And then the Neo-Men arrive. And as soon as I saw the Neo-Men, I'm like, ooh, this is kind of a neat little twist. I'm like, what's going on here? And I was so glad these weren't just throwaway characters that, we do later on get a little bit more in depth in who they are, what they're about, and their connection to the story. I was really happy with that. I'm really happy with how they introduced them.
Yeah, I am too. And I like this idea of hope because there's a politics to this world. And it's something that we're going to see a little bit more as this story starts to unfold. The idea of world leaders not being real happy about this. Because of the fact that this king's coming on the scene now, and people are, from a PR standpoint, Arthur's doing pretty good in the ratings. Yeah. He comes in there, takes out a Neo-Man, and he's basically saying, hey, listen, it's combat to the death. Arthur's never content to merely hold his own. He either dies or he triumphs. And he's like, I'm not stopping until this thing's done. And he wins, and people are all just like in awe of him. And this idea of him being this figurehead of hope, like he'd win the popular vote, no problem at all.
Immediately. Yeah. He's got it. And again, it's the fact that, everyone's always afraid of these Neo-Men and how these are this big mindless brutes that, they just run roughshod on people. And here you have this guy, open hand-to-hand combat, takes one down. And I love the fact that he goes through, and then even the media is getting in on it, and he's just like, get away from me. I'm not here for you. And it was a really cool moment, especially because, they talk about how as he's fighting, as he's combating, and in all the people all over the world, something awakens. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, that's the king, baby.
as the story continues on, we see Arthur finally climb up. And the cool part about what the inscription early on was, people saw the inscription before he climbed up there and said, "Hey, this is my sword."
Yeah.
And I'm the king, and this is mine. He goes up and grabs it and pulls it out, and you see the historical moment. You see him reliving that moment, and when he pulls it out, and there's this whole magic pouring out of the sword, really sending out this real cool presence, and Merlin being a part of that energy that is being leached out. It was such a cool opening sequence. I really, really loved how that all played out, and even Arthur was surprised by the components that are in there. Merlin's got a strategy of his own that he's playing out, and he keeps it close to the vest. It's one of the things that I really enjoy about the character of Merlin, is that it's very hard to trust him because he's always scheming. And there's information that he's withholding because that's just what he does. And it was something that I just really enjoyed, that the identities of each of these people were not lost to their legend. And it made for a richer story, I think, to have these people in the far future, but yet in their roles, respectively.
Yeah, and it was funny because when the energy went out, that's when I started thinking there's something more going to happen here. That's when I started thinking about the, either reincarnation or energy or something like that. And it wasn't going to be them assuming the role of Lancelot and Guinevere. They would actually start becoming Lancelot and Guinevere and stuff like that. And it was when that energy went out, that's when that notion first started popping in my head. And again, I liked how, it was this inspirational speech that, Arthur's giving, and they show the world cheering and high-fiving and shaking heads and hugging and all that wonderful bit. But the neat thing that I caught on my second read-through was Arthur was surprised by the energy. I didn't realize that Arthur was going to be surprised by it. And that was something that I was like, oh, that is a neat thing, because, again, that's all Merlin's play. And then even later on, when the energy goes out and that hand grabs him almost, and I was looking at the hand, and I see it looks like a female hand. And I'm like, I wonder, and I guessed who it was, by the way. And I was like, oh, that is kind of cool, because, again, they're bringing in the whole legend. I didn't know how she was playing into it, but I liked the fact that she was there and almost intercepted, and almost, got it. So.
Yeah, and they played her very well in this, where it was easing into that. I think actually I would say every character in this, they eased into the introduction. It's one of the things about knowing that you're going to have a 12-issue maxi series. Being able to give the story time to breathe like they did was, because that wasn't very common in that time. You would get like a 4-issue or a 6-issue miniseries. There weren't many 12-issue ones. We're very used to at this point seeing stories of varying lengths. This was a little more uncommon at that time, and when he got them, they were special.
And when the energy goes out and Joan Acton gets hit with the energy bolt, and she starts remembering, and they show that little flat. They show that her sitting there, and she imperfectly she remembers. There's minor, and it's like it's a shadowing in her brain. She doesn't completely remember everything. I loved how, again, they had the knights there. Then they had her and they had Guinevere and Lancelot kissing, and for a brief moment in my head, I did have this thought. I was like, I wonder, are they going to do a reversal? Is she actually Lancelot and the other guy, Guinevere, and do a body switch? And I was thinking that'd be kind of a neat story. And it was one of those things, it was a thought that popped in my head and then quickly dissipated. But it was neat seeing just this whole layout. And right from the beginning, again, it really cemented in me that she is 100% Guinevere. That especially showing Guinevere and Lancelot kissing there. I'm like, oh, they're bringing it in, they're going to do the full story. And it was kind of a neat moment, just this one scene going, okay. And it really locked in my head. We're dealing with full reincarnations. And I kept wondering, who's Tom going to be? Because I was thinking Tom was going to get an energy bolt and he never did. I'm like, wait, come on, man. Tom is cool.
Actually, the thing I liked about Tom and the use of Tom, well, and here's, I know you've read farther along in the story than I have. I've deliberately read and reread issues 1 through 6 to try and keep myself from the jump to spoiling it. You know, I kind of wonder, like, what is Tom's journey going to be like in the later issues of this particular story? It's interesting when you take a look at Guinevere and Arthur's way of reaching her. I thought this was a really important scene because they start, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later, they start going back to the Guinevere, Lancelot, Arthur triangle. But before you get to that, you got to believe there's something between the two of them. Otherwise, why does that even matter? This sequence where from just his kiss he's able to rekindle her memory was pretty important because you got to believe that there's some form of love, some form of romance between the two of them. And that was a great way of establishing that.
Yeah. Yeah, there is that connection between them. They have that, that moment. And again, it was funny because, as I said before, I wanted Tom to get an energy bull, but immediately, I'll tell you, I did start thinking about Tom as Arthur's squire. Because you think back to a lot of the legends, yep. Arthur has that young squire who goes on and tells the story. Keep the ideals of Camelot alive, and he passes on that, and even Arthur references this, earlier on in issue 1 when Tom's like, hey, of course I know who you are. You're King Arthur. He's like, my young squire they did keep the legends alive. So I was immediately thinking Tom was going to be that role. When an energy started going out and Tom didn't get hit, that's what I was thinking on. He's going to be the squire. And that's the role he kind of does have throughout this. So it's kind of neat. But I completely agree with you. It's kind of cool just seeing that everything play out. And even she is a warrior. This is not the timid Guinevere, oh, save me, I'm a damsel in distress. She's a fighter. And I really love those stories where we get Guinevere as a fighter. We get her as a legit, badass, So I was very happy with the fact that, she's got this strange guy in her room. She tries to call security. Merlin blocks that. She goes, okay, I'm going to grab a gun. I'm going to light these guys up. And I thought that for me was a really cool Guinevere solid moment.
I agree. It was, and I was really glad it was her. And when that reveal came in, and it was something, especially when the first memory sequences started playing, I'm like, oh, wow, she's going to be Guinevere. That was really, really cool. I wanted that to happen. So it was neat. We start to see this continue to move forward where Arthur's trying to build this new Camelot, which I thought was really awesome. The idea of this futuristic new Camelot and Arthur going on that end. And us finding out that is, in fact, Lancelot with Jules. Yeah. You already knew that. So that was something that immediately came out on your end. As he walked into New Camelot and we knew whose place it was, I was like, oh, of course that's Lancelot. That was sweet. Yeah. I really didn't know until this moment, though, when this sequence was unfolding, that's who that was. I really liked the way that played out.
Oh, big time. Yeah. And again, suspecting that it was him, once I started realizing that they're actually becoming these characters, that for me even added to it. I was like, oh, that is even cooler, man. Because again, this, they've already made reference to the love triangle, so I know that's going to happen again, because that's always the classic tragic flaw, and it leads to the fall of Camelot. So, but again, you get some really neat action moments. And I think that's something the series did a great job with, story and action, because you got the robot security coming after Arthur, and Arthur just takes him down without even, breaking a sweat, because again, he's Arthur. And I like how he gives Merlin a little bit of a jab, like, hey, you could have helped me out there. He's like, well, you're a bit rusty. We need to make sure you're still up to fighting for.
The Morgan Le Fay reveal was pretty cool because of it was so evil. She's laughing at the love triangle. This is her half-brother. And obviously you knew the history between the two of them and the fact that it's got its own little twisted history to it. But it was really cool how that whole piece played out, and we got to see that as we closed out Chapter 2.
Yeah, and again, when I saw the hand, I saw a female hand. I assumed it was Morgan Le Fay, just because she's so connected to the legend. You need to have her in there. I didn't know exactly what her role or how she's revived or any of that stuff was going to happen. But again, just the fact that how they forged this story so far, I was like, oh, that's going to be neat. That's going to be cool. And just seeing her, she clearly wasn't, I didn't know if she was, I assumed it was magic that kept her alive. I didn't know the whole story. So again, Morgan Le Fay is one of those characters that, she does have a form of immortality because of the dark magic, because of all just the evilness that she's done. It's granted her these long lives. So it was a neat, it was a neat little ending of the issue.
We kick off issue number 3, and it's Merlin kind of explaining the lay of the land, what's going on with the magic memories and the fact that an enemy of ours is running out there. And he's being very careful at keeping things close to the vest as far as what's going on, not revealing too much information until it's time, mainly because of the fact that you can he deep down knows that Morgan's watching too, right?
I think so. I think he suspects. I don't know if he knows 100%, but he knows her power levels.
Right.
So he knows how tough she is. So there's probably a suspicion on his part that they're being watched. And, again, one of the things about, Merlin being Merlin, as we said before, he can be a bit of a jerk. Here's one of those moments where I want to reach in the book and give him a quick smack in the head. I'm like, dude, let everybody know what's going on.
Yeah.
Talk this out. We can fix the problem. We know what's going to happen. Let's stop it before it actually happens. And, if Arthur and them had, again, part of it is if Arthur and them had hindsight as to what's going on, maybe things would have gone better for them. Maybe they could have prevented. I don't know. But it is one of those things about, each of these characters have their flaws. We've already seen the hint at the love triangle coming back, and that's Guinevere and Lancelot's flaws, but even how Arthur handles it is his flaw. Now you think back to the original fall of Camelot was because of the adultery. Arthur had to sentence his wife to death, and I have to stick by the laws that I have made. Now Lancelot didn't get a death penalty; only the wife did. But again, that was back then. And I'm like, that's, so it's like these are the flaws that these characters have. And now as I'm reading this book, I'm wondering, like, are they going to stick to that? Or are they going to handle it a different way? And those are the kind of stuff that I was really excited for as all this stuff is playing out. And again, seeing Morgan as just this evil, evil person was absolutely wonderful. So even the point where she's sitting there spying on them. You see she's connected with the aliens, and then you see how she deals with people who approach without her permission. I was just like, ah!
Which makes her totally fun. I mean, it's...
Oh, God, yeah. She's a wonderful villain.
Yes. Lancelot's relationship with Guinevere is, like, bittersweet because the thing I love about it is you see how much in love they are when they're around each other. Yeah. But you also see how much it torments all three of them. It torments Arthur, it torments Lancelot, it torments Guinevere. It's an interesting sort of triangle in the sense that, I know it's wrong, but yet it's true love, and yet I love Arthur, but the love for Arthur's a different kind of love than the passion that she has for Lancelot, and it plays out really, really well in this. And you see, Arthur is a king where he realizes that part of the burden of wearing the crown is it sort of separates him from Guinevere in many ways. Yeah. And there's that kind of, conundrum as well, where there's the responsibility of the crown that drives a lot of Arthur. And I've always enjoyed that element of the story, and it plays out really well here. It's great seeing this done in comic art where you see the emotional reaction of each of the characters and how it's unique to each of them in those particular panels. Some great artwork in this as far as taking that unfolding drama as well.
Oh, big time, big time. And again, it's one of those things I love how they really took the time to, Lancelot's sitting there praying basically for strength, even though the scene before, he's like one of the, he's openly involved in this affair. And you see Guinevere, how she's upset to the point where she's got the tear going down as she's trying to figure out who do I go with, what's going on here, and then just the trouble of Arthur. And these are the moments where I want to step in, give all three of them a smack in the head, say, dudes, let's figure this out, and it's kind of a neat moment, because after you have this touchy moment, then you've got each one of them has to have a quest to bring back another one of the knights, to bring back another knight of the round table. And I was like, okay, this is kind of neat. I was wondering what was going to happen with the other knights. So each one of them has the pendant, and I thought that for me was like, oh, this again, a cool part of the story I never even thought would have to happen, but I liked it.
And it became a storytelling reason to explain why they were only using 6 knights.
Yeah.
And the real reason behind the scenes, Mike W. Barr talks about it in the intro of the trade. He talks about the fact that they were on a deadline. He was very concerned about keeping the book on time and how hard it would be to have Brian Bolland doing the entire Knights of the Round Table, the depth of the art and detail of the art, throughout, having to keep track of that many characters.
Oh, yeah.
And trying to keep to a monthly schedule. As it was, the book, there's a reason why the book has multiple inkers along the way. After a certain point in time, he was trying to get DC to allow them to keep a certain number of issues in the can ready to go. It didn't go that way. And the delays that he was worried about wound up happening on the book, which happens from time to time. But it's funny how there's a storytelling reason and yet a constructive reason as far as why they stuck to a certain number of characters.
Yep. I'll tell you, when they're going to get Kay, something that I caught in the background, because Kay, he's a flim-flam, he's a con man, and just, he owes the wrong people money. But even this in the background, you see this is supposed to be not the cleanest part of the town, not the cleanest part of Chicago. You got they show what looks to either be a dead person, a drunk person, or a homeless person, not exactly sure. And then there's what obviously is a gentleman's club. And that was like, whoa, okay, DC, again, 1980s. I never would have imagined that they would have artwork, that risque, that suggestive back then. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it was. That was something that this was where this started to happen with some direct releases, and it was very It was very specific to certain stories that would start to have some form of appropriate to the story adult content. It was an interesting time to start to see comics telling stories that they weren't, were outside code and were, you weren't previously allowed to tell, and that was neat. I was with you. I enjoyed the quest looking for each individual one. We got to see the great story of looking for Sir Kay. It was great to see Guinevere find Percival, but
yes,
it was too late. And Percival winds up, turning into one of the Neo-Men, and yet retains the memories and loyalty of Percival.
He's still a knight. He's
Yeah.
still Percival. And I like that. And I'll be honest with you, I was actually thinking Tom. When they were throwing out, when I realized, okay, it's going to be reincarnation stuff, before I realized that Tom's not going to be, I was actually thinking Tom was going to become Percival. Just because of Percival's character, just who he was, I figured, I think Tom would probably be a good Percival, but then when they did this way, I was like, oh, this is so much better. That he is. And I love how he has his realization and then he turns into the Neo-Man. And I was like, oh, man, that is awesome. And, of course, he remains who he is. And, again, these were some of those cool moments. I was like, oh, man, I never even thought they would do that. And, again, tying back to when they first introduced the Neo-Men as being these mindless brutes, well, not anymore. Now we have a knight who's in that body. I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome.
Galahad and Lancelot was a cool sequence, too, where, Galahad isn't gotten his memory back, but he's ready to end his life because of his own failures in life. Yep. And I love how, that turns into all right, Dad, I'm going to go with you for now. And he even says it, I will join you for now. Because, he's ready to, really take his life out of honor because of his mistakes. And it was cool to see how that sequence play out as well. I really liked that these characters, even though they're reincarnated versions, they did have lives in this world. They had identities in this world, and those have not been thrown out the window because of the fact that they remember who they were in their previous life. And I think that was pretty important that we get to see those elements as well, and that they continue to influence the story.
Oh, big time. Especially, with, I loved how, as it's going on, they keep playing back to the prior lives. They have these other memories. They have these other full-on life going on with that. And that is a really neat portion of this story that, again, I didn't think would happen. Because, again, when I was initially starting to read, I wasn't thinking reincarnation. And then once they did the reincarnation, they don't let it go. They still have that. He still has his son. He still has his family that he's leaving behind on this quest. And for me, that was just a great moment. And again, the fact that it's Merlin who is the one who picks him up, and has no compassion for the guy or gives him a moment to really say goodbye to his family.
Gawain's reveal was pretty cool, too. That Gawain had moved on with his whole life, had this entire family, which was a cool piece with Merlin. Merlin's cold in that sequence, which was something that you get to see. If you're having somebody go to recruit people, it really shouldn't be Merlin ever.
Yeah, he's not a people person. He's not a people person at all. But I'll be honest with you, of all the people recruited, that probably was the only one really could have gotten away with it, because anybody else would have been it wouldn't have ended well. Because you think about just all the other people, they really needed a personal touch to recruit them. Especially when you're dealing with Tristan.
That was a cool sequence.
Dude, that was a great swerve. Yeah. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, not what I was expecting at all.
No, yeah, and again, it's neat because how I said when I first saw Lancelot and Guinevere, I had a weird notion in my head that they'd flip the sex of them. That, Lancelot would be in the female form, Guinevere would be in the male form. It'd be a weird kind of, just the Freaky Friday kind of flip, and I was like, that'd be kind of a neat story. And, they didn't do it, obviously. And I was like, oh, okay. And again, not saying anything bad because I was absolutely loving what they did because they're bringing in the full love triangle. So when they actually do it here, I was like, oh, that is absolutely brilliant. Because, Tom shows up thinking it's going to be Sergeant Owen McAllister is going to be the knight. And no, it's his wife, Amber March.
What's interesting with Morgan Le Fay is she's watching all of this and seeing their relationships have these holes in them. Knowing that, it's great. They're the Knights of the Round Table. They're, unified, hurrah, hurrah, all that kind of thing. But I know something you don't know that's going on. And it's something that's really fun in this as she watches. Because they do really well in battle. When there's a crisis going on. Like a lot of people really do. But when there's downtime, that's when the cracks start to show. I'm glad that plays into this story because I think there's a truth to that, not just in fiction, but in real life, that people tend, you're on the go. You don't have a lot of time to sit down and process and then, reflect and react to, interpersonal things. But boy, when you can, this group is about as messed up as you can get. It's funny, Jim, as we're heading into issue 4, I remember my first reading of this was like at 3 a.m. I fell asleep downstairs, and as I often do, I'll grab the cat, I'll go upstairs. You know how like by the time you do that, you're like, okay, I'm awake again. So I'll typically read a comic to fall asleep. And sometimes I'll partway through, I'll get really tired. The most sincere compliment I give this story is, I read 4, 5, and 6. I could not put it down. I ended up staying up till 5, and then I got up and had breakfast and went to work. So it was part probably the most sincere compliment I can give this story is the fact that it was that engrossing. I was like pulled in. And I think one of the nice things, the differences between chapter 1, 2, and 3 and 4, 5, and 6, 1, 2, and 3 established, first of all, the future world, established who the knights were. 4, 5, and 6 is like, okay, we've told you everything foundationally you need to know. Now let's really go with this story. We know who the big bad is. We know about Merlin. We know about Morgan. All those pieces are in play. And there's enough intrigue here where you're like, we've got all the familiar of the knights that we were looking for and know they've been reincarnated, and with some twists, particularly with Percival and Tristan to be...
yeah.
But then, foundationally, everything's in place. Now we've got this assault on New Camelot issue that's kicking off right here, where people are all in on King Arthur, except for the world leaders, who are like, okay. And this is where I really started getting into this. I'm like, oh, this is neat. Of course they're not going to be okay with this. Popular vote is all over this guy, and that's a threat to their power. They're 4 very different rulers are playing out here, and it shows you just how... It's a cool statement on the nature of politics.
Yeah.
And what people will do to retain power. At this point, they're not caring about the fact that this guy may be able to, take care of this alien invasion. That's not their concern at all. They don't want that to happen if it means that they're deposed. So it's an interesting sort of, where political power of any sort can corrupt. And I'm not that all politicians are corrupt, but in the case of this particular group, they all certainly are in their own unique ways, right?
And again, I loved just this opening. As you said, it was a really cool political statement, and the current vibe on how we have, just how nasty politics have gotten in recent years. And it's not even just this last presidency. It's been every year it's getting worse and worse and worse. And just the partisan and it's both sides. I'm not saying one side's bad and the other side's good. Both sides are doing dirty they're doing dirty tricks. And it's one of those things when the TV ad starts going up on the politicians, you just want to, it's just like, oh God, let this stop, because you're all bad. And so I loved how, this book still, again, in 1983, and it's addressing this stuff. And we really, I don't remember, but again, I was a kid back then, so I don't know how deep it went, how deep this kind of politics went in the early 80s. But it's something that rings true to date. And I love how all the people, and they did all walks of life here, from a guy dressed like King Tut to some just everyday average, people, all, races, ethnicities, genders, everything across the board. They're all like, the king, we want the king, he will save us. And I love that kind of just that bit. And then you go right into the corrupt politicians who just are like, we're just going to ignore what they want, and we'll do what we want.
Yeah, and that was a cool little thing about all of this, was the idea of there's not even a what do the people want, what's best for our people, and who's taking advantage of this. This Jordan Matthew, the UN security director, I felt like, what is his deal? And when you start to wonder off the page is this guy tied in with Morgan? Is this guy his own entity? Like, is there a third player? Is this guy a reincarnated version of somebody that we don't know yet? What does this all look like? Because what I didn't know at this point when I was reading it was, were there other reincarnated characters that we have yet to see? I liked how that played, because you could immediately tell that, okay, he's a little more connected. I didn't immediately jump to the fact like it was definitely determined that he was working with Morgan, but my head went there a little bit as far as that may be a thing, or he may potentially work with Morgan as the scenario was going on. It was an interesting, dramatic build.
Yeah, I was thinking, seeing him, that one obviously was the villain, and I didn't know if he 100% was with Morgan, or if he would eventually, team up with Morgan, because the line he has there, It's like King Arthur is good as dead, and your power is secure. Then he thinks, until I slay you and seize it for my own. I'm like, okay, so that tells me he 100% is a bad guy. And being a bad guy, I started throwing around ideas in my head. If he's a reincarnated, who he could be, because Morgan Le Fay always had her partner in crime throughout all the Arthurian legends. So I'm like, it could be him, or he could just be a corrupt politician like the other corrupt politicians. I didn't know exactly where he was going to dance with Morgan, but you knew he was going to be a bad guy. You knew he was going to work with Morgan Le Fay, and you knew, you're hoping that he eventually dies a horrific death.
So this sequence with the round table winds up being a really cool thing, because Lancelot's hitting this button. I didn't know what was going to happen there until the table came out. One of the things that I really loved about this story is, yes, there's the interpersonal dynamics that's going on with the knights and how their relationships are being affected by a wide variety of issues. But one of the things that connects them all is this sense of honor, this sense of duty. And the round table is a symbol of honor. It's a symbol of achievement. It's a symbol of status. And there's a lot to that where they respect the fact that being asked to sit at that table, being given that honor, is something that's to be noted, that only a chosen few actually are a knight of the round. That was really cool. Then seeing each of them formally introduced to Arthur, where now all pretense of who, the fact that they're reincarnated versions, they've had these future lives and those are still pieces. They remember who they are. They remember Arthur. They remember that this is their king. They remember that they're a part of all this. And now we're getting through that piece. Sir Tristan's bit, I got to say, the choice of doing this, especially in the 80s, was cutting edge and was really brilliant. Because even the dynamic of trying to determine, is Tristan female? Is Tristan male? Why? And trying to determine what that looks like in particular, and even how they interact with Tristan. This is the same Tristan, but because Tristan's in a female body and was living a female life up until this point, it's an interesting, different sort of relationship that Tristan has with the knights than previously. Yeah. And it's playing out. And I love how it's a dynamic that Tristan's rebelling against. Because Tristan's we're dealing with some very high-end concepts of the fact that it doesn't matter male or female. Tristan is competent. Tristan is effective. Tristan is smart. And Tristan is a member of this group. And an important member of this group that should not be diminished because of gender. And they were exploring this in the 80s.
Yeah, I know. That was a cool thing. That's a cool idea that they did that, and with the whole Lady Tristan, Sir Tristan. And every time Tom calls her Amber, she's like, my name is Tristan. Yeah. You get that moment. And even like when we first introduced her last issue, at the wedding, first thing does is takes Tom's sword, chops off the hair, and goes to, the male cut. As opposed to keeping the long flowing locks and getting rid of the dress, getting, into the clothing, arming up and just basically saying, hey, I'm a knight. I'm not a lady, and I love just, again, this notion of this gender switch. I think that for me was something kind of cool. And you think back to, nowadays, with present time, if this story was being told present time, this wouldn't be as a big, oh my God, shocker, because we do have, gender identifications. We do have this kind of stuff going on in present day society. But this was never really, this wasn't addressed in the 80s. This kind of stuff wasn't, talked about openly and publicly and favorably. There was a lot of, I can imagine, back in the day, there was probably a lot of people who were very angry and or thrown off by this notion, just because of how, people looked at life a little differently back then. And, again, not saying it's right, saying it's wrong, but, that is that time. So the fact that he did this in the story really made me say, oh, that is cool. And then you go right into that, right from the dealing with Tristan, then, into Percival with him being a Neo-Man. And I love how they're initially reacting to it. Okay, initially reacts to it saying, "Hey, this is a Neo-Man. I won't serve." And I know that's still Percival. I thought that, again, all these sequences was really awesome.
And you know who he is. You know what his history is. You know what he's accomplished. So why are we not giving him the same support that we would give him if he looked different? And I love that Tristan's the one rushing to Percival's defense, because Tristan's like, I get this. What are you doing? This is Percival. And I really love, because these are concepts, differences and different looks, and the fact that immediately because he looks like a Neo-Man, we are going to treat him differently. They're exploring some pretty deep concepts that today, it's funny, again, this isn't me trying to get political. I've had debates with friends of mine who think some of the topics that have been in the news with comics like John Kent and stuff like that, and I'm not going to go crazy into that at the moment, are like, well, comics now are being pressured by today's culture and society to do these things. I said, are you kidding? I grew up with comics doing this kind of stuff. I mean, we're not afraid to tackle some social issues and really talk about cutting edge. To your point, in the 80s, nobody was talking about this stuff.
I know. Comics
were really addressing it. And I thought it's really great when you look at this, that this is where I feel this story's when you talk about is something dated or not, boy, does this read very contemporary with some of the things that it's exploring in this. Where I feel like we as a society are finally ready for this, or starting to be ready for this, in its discussion, or you hope, right?
Yeah. I think we're getting better at it, but we still have room to go. And I'd like to think by the year 3000, we will be better off than we are now. Because, it's, but again, I don't know. Who knows how society is going to turn. And that's one of the neat things.
Here's the thing, even in the year 3000, they're having some issues with it.
Now, I love immediately how when they're all raising their swords, and, yay, the knights, and Lancelot, of course, and that most of all ladies, Queen Guinevere, and Tom calls it. He's like, dang it, man, didn't you learn your lesson from the last time? Come on. He's falling in love with the queen, and this time if he takes the round table with him, Earth is doomed as well. I love the fact that they put that in there, because I don't know about you, I was thinking the same thing throughout this.
Tom is their snapper car.
Yes, exactly.
But a little bit more everyman, in the sense that you can relate to Tom. Tom feels current.
Tom's our voice in the Knights.
Yeah. And I really dig that. I love that we go back to Tristan's, fiance to be, and see him kind of having a reaction to this whole thing, where he's like, what is good, and recognizing that he can be manipulated. We've got the UN, whereas he's our boy that we know is evil. He's like, all right, we're going to take a little advantage of this. What do you think about going to New Camelot and taking these people down, the ones that caused you your pain and misery? And totally manipulating the situation. It was really, really cool, because this is something that I wanted to see at this point. We're 4 issues in. I'm ready for another battle. And they barely have time to celebrate before they are being attacked. And you get that cool spread. May we all live to sing of it. And you see them charging into battle. I was so ready for it at that. And beautiful Brian Boland art as you see them charge into battle.
Oh God, yes, 100%. And it's funny because I made a comment earlier how it'll be kind of they could do a modern artist on there, and then you get pages like this, and you're like, no, this right here, this 100% is the only artwork I want on this story. Mm-hmm. And it's something that, again, it not even just the nostalgia for me is to the 80s artwork. This flat out is beautiful artwork. This could be a modern story told today. Exactly how it is. The way everything's laid out. I think maybe they tweak a little bit of the fashion. The one guy with the mullet has to go, but other than that, I think they're rocking it.
Yeah, and that piece, you're right. When you were dealing with mullets and clearly 80s hairstyles, and you're right, but that's not the Boy, it's hard to say that the art's not being dated there. It's more, it was done in the 80s to give you like a contemporary 80s kind of haircut. You're right. And that's a thing. It's funny, in the year 3000, the 80s haircuts come back, apparently.
Yeah. Hey, the mullet's never died, man. It never dies. It's still out there. It's, it's just not as popular, but you know what? You'll find them still. Heck, I almost had one.
Clearly, because Tristan's kind of rocking the Brigitte Nielsen, right? Wasn't that Red Sonja? Was that?
Red Sonja, yeah.
That's funny. I was glad to see this battle come into play, though, because you know what's cool about this? They're going out there with, like, swords.
Yeah.
And fighting, like, flying aircraft. Like, Arthur at one point in time is cutting the wing off of one of them. I was like, this is sweet.
Well, and I do like the fact that they do have some modern energy weapon stuff.
Yep, I agree.
They've got the energy shields and the energy swords even. Mm-hmm. Arthur's got Excalibur.
Right.
But the others, they've got energy weapons. They've got more modernized stuff. And I was like, that was something I kind of liked seeing. And again, I liked seeing just the battle and them going into fight. I liked how Guinevere tried to call off the attack. Or get air support there, to help out New Camelot. Again, these are neat little ties into the fact that, yes, she's Guinevere. Yes, she remembers everything about being Guinevere, but she hasn't forgotten who she was. She still has all those memories, all that stuff. And, you really see it play out heavy in Tristan, but especially people like Guinevere and, Gawain, where with him and his family that he left behind. There's some really cool moments of how they connect with who they were in the past. That's something that I really enjoyed, and I'm really happy that they did the reincarnation versus what I originally thought they were going to do, where it was just be new people assuming the roles. This added to a whole nother level of, yes, this is, the knight, but they also have this prior life.
What's so interesting about the Tristan story, and I really love this sequence with Tom, where, she goes in and she kills who was her former fiance. And, because of her loyalty to the knights and their direction, she knows that that's the thing to do, or he knows, because it really is Tristan. It's the funny part with what Tristan's dealing with. It's multiple, a whole lifetime as Amber, and then realizing I lived as a female, which was a lot, and I guess the question becomes, was the life of Amber a lie? And when does Tristan begin and Amber end in those particular sequences? It's a piece that I really love because it's exploring this conflict. There's an internal conflict going on with Tristan, because how do you ignore the fact that you were Amber for as long as you were, and then now your memories are of living a full life as a Knight of the Round Table as Tristan? And the conflict of that has to be enormous.
Oh, big time, big time.
And you see it play out in the anger.
And it was funny. One of the things that, in this sequence in particular, made me realize something. I actually went back and reread some stuff. Mm-hmm. The body count, the killing of humans, is huge on this book. And it's not even because, you can kind of understand the invading aliens, but it's actually killing people, because you think back when Arthur grabbed Kay, he killed 3 right there without even thinking about it. Ran the one through the sword, shot the other 2. So, they're killing humans on top of killing the aliens that they need to. And it wasn't just like earlier how Arthur killed the one Neo man, and they've killed some guards along the way at the at the nuclear plant, I think. But those are the kind of those, it really gets you thinking. Yes, these are the good guys. These are the heroes, and they're taking human life. Now, in this, I loved how Tom's like, "Hey, thanks for saving my life." He's like, "No, I didn't save you. I saved someone who shares the cause." And again, it's them trying to, just, I don't know. Either I kind of was reading this as they're trying to kill their prior life, and they're trying to end who Amber is and only be Tristan. And part of that, I think, part of it was the fact that, he was going to kill, Tom. So he had to, she had to kill him. But I also do think there was more to it than that. And I think that for me was kind of a neat read into this, because especially, she even has that, moment where he's like, no, not you. She's like, yes, Owen, goodbye. And it was kind of like the end, trying to kill who Amber was. And I love just the power of that sequence.
Speaking of power, Morgan Le Fay's quest for power. Yeah. And it's something that was clearly a part of Arthurian legend, where, she wanted control over the throne and was looking for ways to undermine King Arthur. We're seeing her not just look for magical power here, but political power as well. And she's really gotten her claws into the political climate here with what we see going on with the UN and her. Pretty smart in how that was acting out in this story. I loved that there was a political intrigue element of this that was running through the story as well. It gives you this sense of a three-dimensional, fleshed-out world, right? Where it's not just battles. There is a major story that is going on here and unfolding. And it's kind of fitting when you look at the cover of Chapter 5 and get this idea of Morgan is a lot more power and a lot more connected than we initially realized. This has been a very well thought out and well organized plan.
You got to love the strategery of her. She's absolutely wonderful. And again, beautiful artwork. I love this cover because on the cover there's multiple neat moments on it. You've got the love triangle in the globe. You've got just her sitting on the throne with her little pet thingy. But I also like the fact that she does have a gun strapped to her head. She's not just about the magic. She's about embracing all of the means of destruction. And there's so much more to her than just, this. And then, of course, there is the general sexiness of the character. And this, for me, was just an absolutely brilliant cover.
I love the three characters, too, being in the globe. She's basically with, again, showing her power. One of the things that was great about this cover, when you look at it, and all the covers have this element, and it's something I really enjoyed. The purpose of the cover in these days in particular, because it's an era where you were dealing with newsstand. And this wasn't on the newsstand, I get it, but it was at direct sales shops. The cover really had to be used as an opportunity to draw people's eyes to the book, to pick up the book, because there was a much larger casual crowd than you have today, which I know it's weird to say when you're talking about early days of direct market. But even direct market was one of those things where, I'm sure you had a casual crowd of people that would walk into a comic shop, at least take a look and browse around. The numbers for sales were certainly very, very different in these days.
Oh, yeah. And I like how each of these covers have kind of told the story that's going on in the book.
Yes.
And we get that currently, so I'm not saying we don't do that anymore, but you really did have a lot of times the covers back then. It really did kind of give you what was going on inside, and kind of, tease like, this is the tale of Morgan Le Fay. This is really, we're seeing, with the love triangle going on, we're seeing just her, her side of everything. And so I like the fact that she's on the cover for this one, and it's spotlighted her.
And pacing has been really good in this, because at this stage, you wanted to know, like, okay, give me some more of the details of Morgan, like what happened here. And I liked that they didn't start with this, because, boy, would that have wrecked the pacing, right? If they'd thrown this tale in earlier. Like, This was the right spot. We've done enough with Morgan where it's like, okay, how did she even get here? And this story starts to reveal that, which is really, really awesome. Cool issue.
Yes.
So they're celebrating their victory at this point, and Sir Kay is like, I wanted to see Tristan take him down.
Oh, big time, big time.
And, he's very lucky that Percival was there.
And I like the little bot. And this is something I didn't notice until second read through. That little drink bot that's going around.
Yeah.
Each one of the drink spots, like, drink, sir, drink, sir. When it gets to Tristan, drink, madam. I was like, oh man! I'm like, that is awesome, because again, it further adds to what Kay is doing. Further adds to the whole just Kay being a little bit of a jerk, a lot of a jerk, but it was a little subtle add-on that I was like, oh, that is cool.
So Kay later says that Kay was doing this for the purpose of bringing the team together by him being the the target of anger, the target of hate. I could see Kay being manipulative like that. Do you take Kay at face value at that?
100%.
Yeah.
I honestly think that this was Kay doing that. Because you see, it wasn't just Tristan and Percival, but it was Gawain and Galahad, because they were sitting there saying, "Hey, we're going to leave. If we're going to sit around, I'm just going to go to my family. I got to see my family." Well, now they're not. Now they're not. Now the knights are sticking around, because something we said earlier. When this team has got someone to stab or punch or fight, they're a well-oiled machine. It's the downtime that causes them problems. So, kind of need to keep that energy up, need to keep that up. Now, I think their handling of Tristan, again, probably isn't the best. They needed Arthur, to talk to Tristan, not Guinevere. And Arthur needs to acknowledge that you are Sir Tristan. You are my knight. Whether you're in this form or your other form, you are my knight and I trust you. Arthur needed to do that, and Arthur didn't. And that's one of the things that, one of the flaws that Arthur has. He's a great leader. He's a great king. But the little nuances, stuff like that, is something he always misses. And just the interplay. You think back to every time they've really done the fall of Camelot, when everybody knows about the affair, but they're not acknowledging it, and Arthur is kind of like burying his head in the sand until it's completely exposed, and then he's got no choices. If Arthur had handled things a little bit differently, maybe Camelot wouldn't have fallen all those different times. If Arthur had dealt with Tristan a little bit differently, maybe there wouldn't be this kind of animosity. But again, it's Arthur, his type of leadership style. As I said before, he's not a reluctant leader. He stands up there and he does it, but he isn't the greatest people person. He's a great motivator. You're sitting there, you're like, hoorah, I will go to war with this man. But he's not completely always the, hey, you're my buddy, you're my friend kind of leader. And there is that weird kind of connection. And part of it is because he is a king, not a leader, not a general or a captain or a commander. He's a king, and he has that presence to him, and he does have that little bit of around with dealing with others. But again, this was a great sequence, because again, Tristan really furthers on the Tristan story, but it also, I love Percival on this. This is a great character where no dialogue is done. But it's Percival steps up and saying, "This is still Sir Percival. Yep. This is still the same honorable man that he was before."
Very noble. Very noble.
It.
Yeah, the nobility of him, I think, was really shined.
It comes through strong.
I really liked the handling of that, because I thought that was something that you could underdo. I think the way, and I think Tristan and Percival having this respect of each other, I think was something that really needed to be done, because you want to believe that these are comrades in arms.
Yeah.
And this story does show that they do ease into that at very, very easily at times. And it's something you want to believe. We get into Morgan and what's going on with Jordan, and the fact that they're not only watching Arthur and Kay and what's going on and the bickering and the internal turmoil there, but also they're quote-unquote allies. Now, here's the thing. I wouldn't want to be a part of either team, of Morgan and Jordan or this other foursome here, because here's what you don't know at any point in time. When's it going to be my turn? When are they going to turn on me?
Yeah.
It happens. I think it's a very real-world example of there are people that are power-hungry. They give up any sense of ethics, any sense of loyalty, any sense of trust. These four, as convenience, they're like saying, okay, we should give this guy another chance, and hope if he succeeds, we will depose him then and take control. And they're like not recognizing that they're being watched, and this is the time for them to take a hit over this. Really, really cool how that whole sequence, played out. And we get to see the reveal of not all is well with Morgan Le Fay.
Yeah, things are going good for her.
Yeah. And there's a story to be told here. You know, she's well aware of the fact that, listen, Jordan, you're trying to sweet talk me. You're trying to, think you're going to somehow take the lead over me. That's not going to happen. And Morgan asserts some authority there pretty quick, which was pretty important in that sequence because that's who we know her to be. And I think it's really important that when she notices any form of defiance, for her to stamp it out pretty quickly. And we get her story, which was really neat. That's what I said earlier, where if you've never read, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I want to listen to you guys and decide whether or not I want to actually read this. Good part about this is this episode, we're talking about the first half of this. I encourage you to read this and jump on, if you haven't, read this, jump on it because it gives you everything you need. This origin of Morgan Le Fay right here is like the right amount of space for this. I learned, it refreshed my memory of Morgan's story, but also gave us some more details on how she relates to this particular world and what happened to her in this world. It tells just enough that, it's generic. I want to be careful saying generic because it makes it sound diminished. But it's general enough that it fits into most Arthurian legend, if that makes sense. But then you can now, okay, that's the establishment there. Let's talk about how she's still here today. What happened that she's on board, because it's a little different than Arthur's journey.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I loved everything you were saying. I was 100% nodding along with you because this did a really great job. If you have absolutely no idea who Morgan Le Fay is, you now know. You now have a really good, solid understanding of who she is, what she's about, why she hates Arthur so much. This is her half-brother. Why does she hate her family so much? Well, you see exactly why. And I loved how, the details they go into this. And a lot of times you can have, where the characters explain, when the villain's explaining, why they're doing what they're doing, they could get sympathy along the way sometimes. You don't get sympathy for Morgan in this. She's the evil one of this story. She is not the good guy. She is not, some of the cool Killer Croc stories where you feel bad for him. Some of the Clayface stories, you feel bad for Clayface because of, what life has dealt them and how they turned it in. And you're like, no, Two-Face is another one. A lot of times you're rooting for Two-Face, for Harvey Dent to take over and snuff out Two-Face. With Morgan, you're never rooting for her. She is evil. And she constantly keeps reminding you of just how nasty she is.
Yeah.
Just from birth, she's like, from birth, I hated him. Every single thing about him. And then even explaining, well, why she hated him. Well, the father killed her father. So, and did that to take her mother. So it was like, okay. But you still then see just all the times she's gone after him, all the times the evil magic. And then finally, even when she is defeated, what does she do? She throws out her essence and she finds this primitive culture. And does she nurture them? Does she help them? No, she basically conquers them. And she, steals their magic from them and then gives them science. And this whole time you can see, she's already starting to lay the groundwork on the invasion. Why did aliens invade Earth? Because of Morgan Le Fay. Why did, this? And you keep seeing over and over again just how evil she is. She, stole from them their power. And then usurped the control, made them her slaves, which she has no regard towards. It's absolutely wonderful way to explain where she comes from, but not ever make you feel bad for her.
One of the things I liked is she was in that well of power.
Yeah.
And they have that sequence there. And there's shadows obviously covering certain elements of her. I really, when I was reading this through, I'm like, wow, first of all, that was a time where that's edgy for the 80s, putting that in a comic. But it was done in such a way where I talked about the movie Excalibur before. That scene would be right at home in the movie Excalibur.
Big time.
So thematically, it belongs here in the way that they're doing it. But I appreciated the way it was done. You could have gone really gratuitous with it, and you didn't. And I don't know what led to that choice. Obviously, it'd have to be a fly on the wall as far as, where did shading and choices of that come into, where you find the right balance. But it was something when I was looking at that, I'm like, wow, it's interesting. I would love to know when you put those sequences in, especially in the 80s, where it's a time where, okay, this is an interesting choice in the 80s to do this. But yet you've got movies like Excalibur that are telling this kind of story. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of movies like that, sword and sorcery movies and things like that tend to skirt those lines. I thought it was cool that it did that without going too far, if I'm making any sense at all.
Oh, yeah. Oh, big time. And I completely agree with you. It was one of the neat things about this artwork, that as you said, it completely fit in the groove. Mm-hmm. I loved how they used the creative shading and just things to cover up the various parts to, keep it okay to sell, and it's, again, it's clever and how, again, they draw her very sexy. She looks really good. Even when she's got the growth and all that stuff on the back, you can still say, well, I can get it where I can deal with this, and just the sequence on where that came from and just how she lasted so long and everything about this it's those moments where you have this really cool stuff that doesn't take away from that she's evil
and powerful. It's kind of like, and powerful, because here's the thing you need to believe: this woman we've got the Knights of the Round Table. They're going up against her. It's yes. Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and Merlin. And she is a legit threat. And you have to believe that. And it's a key to the sequence. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off on that end, but power is a really, really strong point. She never loses that. And I think you can do sequences like that, and it's done for a cheap, gratuitous purpose, and it diminishes the power. It isn't in the case of this it adds more of this sense of her taking and it becoming an immersive part of her. And there's something there's like a hunger she has for the power that is really apparent. And that was done for that reason. And it's why I noted it, because I thought like, wow, that's an example of how you do that. And it's a storytelling component instead of just being done for shock value, if that makes sense.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely 100%. That wasn't done for shock. That was done for story, and it fits so well in the story they're telling, so well in who she is and what she's about. And again, her hunger for power, her hunger for revenge, all that stuff, all that just that darkness inside her that fuels her. That's what keeps her going. That's what makes her truly evil. And it's one of those things I love how they portray her in this.
I do too. I really liked that about the story. There's a maturity in the storytelling. There's a maturity in the art. And when I say a maturity in the art choices and how they feed story. These are sequential panels with the idea of drawing you into a story. And there was never a point in time where the panels didn't continue guiding you through the story that's being told through the dialogue as well. And it's really, really, it's an example of when you talk about a true artist at work. Brian Boland is certainly that, because this story carries you through with every single panel.
Oh, big time.
As we continue on, we get the sequence with Sir Kay, which was really, really good, and the sequence of Merlin. And the Merlin sequence with Tristan was really, really an important one for me, because Tristan's at a point where it's like, and why the connection with Percival's there. They're both going through similar things, not the same thing. They're going through similar things. Percival's case, Percival went through this situation where, as Percival's awakening to be the Knight of the Round Table that, recognizing the reincarnation, goes through this process to be turned into a Neo-Man. And she's looking, Tristan is looking to help Percival recover his normal form. In Tristan's case, it's like, this is not who I am. Can you help me become who I am? And Merlin's completely unsympathetic. Merlin's kind of like, be gone. It's like, I got much more important things to be dealing with here. Why are you coming to me? And he's like, I've got no time. This is complete and utter, to Merlin, complete and utter nonsense. And a waste of his skills and talent in his mind. I like how dismissive he is. And it's not just of Tristan. It's of Percival. It's the whole situation. At a time where it's like, we're supposed to be coming together as a group. And that is the one thing about the Knights of the Round Table in this sequence. You see how, as long as there's a battle going on, it's a chance for them to be combatants and all that, they can all get on the same page. They're not really good at day-to-day life at all.
No, and again, it's the flaws of character, the flaws of who they are. Mm-hmm. These are great men of action, men and women of action.
Yeah. But
the real life, that's the problem. And I love how, again, Merlin is a bit of a jerk. And we're seeing it here. If Merlin had just explained, hey, I can't do this, this is blah, blah, blah. If he had actually sat down and had people skills, maybe Tristan wouldn't have gone off in such a huff. Maybe it wouldn't have hurt as bad on Tristan. And then you add in their mind, insult to injury when they get back to the room, it's Guinevere there, not King Arthur. And she's like, he sent you because, because we're both women. And the thing is, she's not a woman. She's a man in a woman's body. And I think that's, if one of them would have acknowledged that, if one of them would have said, if Arthur had been there, if Arthur would have, some of the stuff that Arthur was saying to Kay, if he had said that to Tristan, things would be a lot better between them. Things would have been a lot better between the knights. Because Arthur's saying, hey, I can understand. I can't imagine what you're going through. It's got to be tough for you to be reincarnated in this form. But you are still Tristan. You are still my knight. That simple sentence right there would have, made things so much easier for Tristan, and probably 100% would have helped them all out later on. But again, Arthur sent Guinevere because woman to woman kind of talk, which was the worst thing to do. That sent Tristan over the edge even more.
Right. I really appreciated the Lancelot and Tom sequences.
Yes.
Because Tom, at this point, you mentioned before him being kind of Arthur's squire. There's a loyalty there that happened very much at the beginning, and I thought the introduction of those two characters, and that's where I go back to the pacing of this, establishing the relationship between Tom and Arthur at first is really, really important. Because then when this happens, you get why. You get why Tom feels the need to say, oh, come on, Lancelot, why are you doing this? And, you may hit me for this. And I love that he acknowledges that, I know I'm skirting a line here. And I'm going to be respectful of acknowledging the fact that this is not a topic I'm sure that you want to talk about. But there's a reason why I have to be here. And I thought it was really cool the way Tom approached this. I really like Tom as a character. And his purpose in this book is pretty clear. Lancelot's reaction is one of, listen, we are very different, but yet the same in certain ways. And you see, where he's pleading and explaining to Tom, trying to actually, in many ways, maybe justify it for himself.
Oh, big time.
And it's so interesting that we get to see Tom's reveal of the fact that Tom's in love with Amber.
Yes. I love that. I thought that was really cool. And again, I loved how this whole thing played. Everything you were saying, I agree. I love that Tom approached him saying, hey, what's going on? And then Lancelot's trying to explain it, but in a way justify it to himself. But the thing I loved the best about this sequence was, as Lancelot's sitting there, he's like, but don't judge Guinevere too hard. And he's, Lancelot is trying to protect Guinevere, trying to do everything he can to, so Tom doesn't treat Guinevere wrong. And I love that, Lancelot has that protectiveness of this woman that he is 100% in love with. He shouldn't be in love with her, but he is. And I thought that for me was a cool moment. But I also like the fact when Tom's initially apologizing, he's like, hey, don't apologize. You did what you thought was right for the table. Such actions can never be wrong. And I like that notion.
Yeah.
That Lancelot does have this loyalty to the table. He does have this loyalty to Arthur. His great flaw that he has is the fact that he is madly in love with the queen, and it's one of those moments where in all the Arthurian stories, every time I see this play out, I'm like, oh man, come on, dude, you can't do that. And it's always one of those things that tears at the heartstrings whenever I watch or read any of these stories, and especially like even some of the stories where they have it where Lancelot and Guinevere really don't get physical. It's more of just that love that they have that's inappropriate, but they never actually, do anything about it. But the fact that they had that, love, the fact that they, she had, that lust after another man other than her husband, that was the true sin, and he betrayed his king by falling in love with his wife and this and that. Those are the kind of Lancelot. Those are the stories that I really like. Now, granted, this is again, I still love this sequence. I still love this moment, and this was again, it's classic in Arthurian story, and it must be there.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting, Merlin's. Where I love about this story is when you talk about the passage of time, and Arthur and Merlin are having some. It's weird to say outdated discussions. It shows their age. It shows that they come from a different time. They're having a discussion about Arthur's looking at Lancelot and Guinevere and seeing them like that. And Merlin's advice is outdated advice. Where he's in here saying, hey, here's the problem. It's not adultery right now because of the fact that you two aren't married. Solution's easy. Get married. What a backwards notion that is. Like, that doesn't resolve anything. He should be sitting down and talking to Guinevere and, really determining where they... I mean, it's and I love that I'm looking and poking holes in their logic because of the fact that it feels so natural that they would be talking this way because of when they're from.
And here's the thing. When this sequence was going out, I was like having a moment going, no, that's the wrong thing. They shouldn't get married.
Right.
Arthur should not be getting married. Arthur should let Guinevere and Lancelot have their relationship because they're not married. We can completely flip the script here, dude. And I was sitting there and I'm yelling at the comic and I'm hoping, and it's funny because as I'm reading, I'm like going, please, Tom, say this to him. Please, Tom, say this to him. Because, again, he's our eyes and ears into this world. And I'm like, that right there would solve the problem. But again, Arthur has his hang-ups. Arthur has his weaknesses. This right here is his chance to not have any of the problems that he had before. All he's got to do is not claim her as his queen. She's Guinevere. That's all he's got to do. But again, it's Arthur. He's got to have his queen. He's got to have this. And it's, and I love this notion that, they're knowing what's going on. They're going right into, and they're all diving headfirst into what brings them down.
The conclusion of this issue, when they announce the wedding and Guinevere's reaction, and I love Lancelot stepping up, trying to be loyal, which is hard to do in this sequence. But the ending with Tristan is really where I want to go with this. The manipulation of Morgan Le Fay. What a brilliant chess move. You're sitting there saying, okay, we know that at this point in time, Tristan is distraught. If there is a weak link on this team to exploit, in Morgan's mind, I want to say in Morgan's mind, this is where we really get to see the nobility of Tristan put to the test.
Yes.
Because Morgan is now putting in front of Tristan exactly what Tristan wants. The dismissiveness of Merlin, Morgan's like, I'm not going to dismiss you over this. You want help with this? I am here for you.
Yeah.
Totally playing into it. What a great cliffhanger as we go into issue 6.
Oh, big time. And I'll tell you, that was ending issue was like, oh my God, that is awesome. I absolutely love the fact that Morgan's playing that,
The opening of issue 6, the cover of issue 6 is one of those, I love these. All right, how do we wind up here? They can't kill Guinevere, right? Not in issue number 6. But this is an era where, boy, that cover, that makes you want to pick up the book, doesn't it?
Yep, big time.
And then we jump right to the title of this issue, Royal Crossed Out Wedding, Royal Funeral. And, now the debate between Morgan and Tristan, the reality of, hey, you remember Isolde? I can give you all that back. We can open this all back up again for you. Give you access to the life you've lost. The person who you used to be. You can be a man again. You can have the strength of a man again. And it's interesting playing into those tropes and really playing with the mental situation. Tristan really has a conundrum at this moment. What do you do? And where do my loyalties really lie? And how strong are those loyalties? When, quite frankly, the people around me who I'm asking for help don't seem to be willing to acknowledge me in that capacity either. And when I try to help out and be an equal member of the team, I'm diminished because of how I look.
Oh, big time. And I'll tell you, I loved, again, the fact that she's initially like, hey, why should I believe you? It's like, yeah, I've lied before, but I'm not lying this time. And it's just that temptation on top of temptation. And I loved how, Tristan's standing their ground saying, I'm Sir Tristan. I'm no one's sister. It's like, yeah, you believe that, but do your friends on the round table believe that? Look around. How are they treating you? And it was just absolutely, again, she's just a master manipulator. And just as she's really starting to get to it, let's add some more stuff. Oh, yeah, remember your long-lost love? You can have her as well, as a man. I'm like, oh, my God. And it absolutely just loved just how nasty and evil Morgan Le Fay is.
The whole sequence with Jordan, Claire Lachlan, and what Morgan was going to do. Oh, yeah, by the way, that interview, you were going to want to take that one because the assistant you were going to hire, he's dead. When did that happen? Not about 5 minutes or 5 seconds, whatever it was.
Yeah.
It was 5 seconds, I think she said, and then vanished off. Really cool.
Absolutely wonderful. I loved it. Again, little subtle bit, and then of course the assistant comes in, and you're like, oh, okay, there's his old. Right? I have no idea how to pronounce Tristan's love, but I'm like, this is again, it's one of those absolutely just brilliant stuff playing out that I'm like, man, this is again, it's that nice interwoven of manipulation. Just Morgan Le Fay is absolutely wonderful. I love her as a villain.
Could you imagine if this had been a 4 or 6 issue?
You couldn't do it.
Yeah, it just wouldn't. It would have lost. You could do it, but it would look what it would have lost. The real important piece of this is giving it the space to breathe. For these moments with Arthur and Merlin, for example, where Merlin's kind of explaining about Morgan and what's going on there. Finally revealing things. We are 6 issues in, and Arthur just realizes that Morgan, because of Merlin, is just being told now, oh, yeah, the big bad of this story is your half-sister who's still alive. Yeah. And I've had this knowledge all along.
Yes, and he didn't tell him.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's Merlin.
How could you ever trust Merlin with the way that he behaves?
Yes. Now, I do like the fact that, Lancelot is trying to resist, and that he is trying to be a knight and he's trying to be noble.
Yeah.
I do like seeing that. I mean, you have to have that resistance, especially now that they're getting married and she's telling her, you have to do it, and we are done. We can't do this anymore, and it's one of those, I go, it's that night, and even Lancelot goes up to Arthur, is like, hey, Guinevere's going to need a bodyguard. That's me. And she's going to need an escort to the ceremony, a guard, and I love how Lancelot's saying he's stepping up to protect her for Arthur. And even that moment, you can see they both remember the past, they both know what's going on right now, but it is that kind of, that knightly thing where he's telling her, hey, Lancelot's telling Arthur, yes, I did that. I'm not going to. And I believe, and it's funny, I believe Lancelot right now that he honestly and truly believes that, he means this, and he truly does, truly believes that he will not be with Guinevere again.
I do too.
That it's over.
I do too. I think he believes, and he would be loyal. The interesting piece about this is what I love about this story is it has you screaming at it, let Guinevere make her own choice. Because here's the reality of it. Guinevere's torn. So if you were to ask Guinevere, I do believe if you were to ask Guinevere, do you love Lancelot or do you love Arthur? The answer would be both. Mm-hmm. And I think she, at the end of the day, wouldn't you want to know? Like,
yes,
that it wasn't it wasn't because you forced a marriage? Wouldn't you want to, like, let her ponder it, let her figure it out? At the end of the day, if she chooses Arthur, she's going to be far more loyal than she ever would have been through this method, because of the fact that she made the choice because that was her desire to be with Arthur. With this method to it, it's never going to be the case. It's out of loyalty to her king and husband because of the fact that there were vows exchanged, not because she chose him. There's a distinct difference between the two. And I love that, like, that becomes a conundrum where it's like, Arthur, your insecurities are playing out here. And instead of maybe embracing your insecurities, be confident and let her see that confidence. Let her see that trust in her to make the right, whatever decision's the right decision for her, to make that decision and respect it. And I love that this book is making you think that without it being a thing at this stage in the issue, in the story. And I really love the depth of this, where you care about these characters enough that you're starting to, like, to your point, you want to reach in and smack a bunch of them. But I agree with you on the nobility of Lancelot. I believe he's being genuine there. I really, really do. That he's trying to be loyal. He loves Arthur. She loves Arthur too. The question is, what kind of love is it?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. When I was younger and I was reading these stories or watching the movies and all that stuff, I always would think it was just a lust that she and Lancelot had. Uh-huh. And as I got older, you start reading more, you start seeing stuff, and you start living life more. You realize that it wasn't just a lust. There was a solid love that they had. But she does have that love and respect for Arthur. And I love when it's, when you get these stories where you do think Guinevere does love Arthur. Guinevere, isn't just, it's not just you're the king, I've got to do this. They've done a couple really cool stories where Arthur has given her the chance. Hey, you don't have to marry me. Nothing bad will happen to you if you say no. It's, give it time, see what you think. And I do love those kind of stories where I've seen that kind of stuff. Like the Sean Connery Greer one, First Night.
Oh, yeah.
That one was absolutely wonderful because Guinevere was brought into the picture because her kingdom was being attacked by Mordred. And, Arthur was protecting her people. And that's how the marriage kind of came about. And I love the scene where he's like, you don't have to marry me. Camelot will still protect your people 100%. You can go back, live your life. I'm not going to force you into this. And I love how she's like, thank you for that. I want to make this choice because it's what I want, not because I have to do it. And it was a really cool, powerful moment between the two of them. It's kind of stuff like that when I'm reading these stories and when I'm seeing these other stuff, I go back to moments like that where it's read, and I absolutely, it makes you enjoy the story on another level. Just when you think about what is motivation of these people, like with whenever you're going to Tristan, the first time I flat out said that was a mistake. That should have been Arthur. Whenever you're going to Tristan the second time, actually was a really cool sequence because she wasn't going woman to woman. She was going queen to knight. Yeah. She was asking a knight to do a duty for her queen. And I thought that for me was a really cool moment. And I chuckled at that. I won't wear a dress. You won't have to. I like this. That was a really neat, sequence as well.
Showing the compassion of Guinevere too, though.
Yeah.
Being like, no, I get it. You don't have to. Now, this isn't going to end well.
Yeah.
She reaches out to the president.
Yeah.
And is basically, telling the whole story. Oh, that's great that you're getting hitched. Where are you getting hitched at? And you're like, oh, Guinevere. Yeah. This isn't going to play out well. This leads to obviously a whole plan to sabotage the sequence there, which was really, really well played out. Now, we get to see the wedding sequence start to manifest itself, and boy, was that cool. I loved seeing like that hovering, because you want to remember we're in the year 3000, right? So there should be some kind of technology where like, well, that's cool. They have these hovering platforms, and you see these buildings that look futuristic, and there was something cool about it where they've got the right amount of classic and the right, like, it wasn't overdone, if I'm making any sense at all.
Yeah.
It feels like there has been some forward movement in architecture design. There's been forward movement in technology, but not so crazy. It's actually kind of more in line to our reality, right?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, one of the things I loved about this sequence, it harkened back to when the current Queen of England got married during World War II. Mm-hmm. And how the country is rebuilding, and just how they held on to the hope of the Queen getting married. And there's like all these different stories about how people were donating, part of their food ration so they could make a proper wedding cake. And people were donating this, and it just, everyday common London, just the people were rising up, and, this was giving them something to look forward to, giving them hope. And it was a really cool just notion of going on in the real world. And I loved how in the book we get that same notion. We see all these people who are just so enamored with the wedding, and even to the point where we got our mullet guy and the old guy fighting back, and they're taking out some aliens, and they're the oppressed are fighting back. And they're not laying down. And it was a really cool moment, because again, it shows just the strength and the power that Arthur does give. And it is part of the reason why Arthur does need Guinevere. The king does need his queen. And I thought that, for me, because I was a big proponent, when the initial story, when we were initially reading this, to have them not get married. Say, you don't really need that. If you don't go that route, you can actually save the round table. And they're showing us in this sequence why they needed to get married, why we need Arthur and Guinevere together, why we need the king and queen. We need something that people can rally around. We need something that gives people hope. And I love the fact that they put that in there, because that was something that, as I was reading this, I was like, oh my God, that's right. This is awesome. Completely threw out what I was thinking before about, hey, don't have them get married. Now I understand why they had to get married. Yeah. It wasn't just Arthur's arrogance. It was more to it. There was that strength that the two of them give to everybody. I loved it.
Yeah. And it becomes there's a responsibility component to it that it's almost tragic, where you sit there and go, you understand why they're getting married and how there's a responsibility element to it. And you see that they do love each other. There's a love there. It's a different sort of love and passion. And I don't know that it's fair. This is not disputing what you said earlier about how, like, in your past, you felt like there was a lust between Lancelot and her. I actually agree with you that there's so many stories where it has that appearance. And in the telling of it, in certain sequences, it is that. In this case, there's a genuine love for Lancelot, and it's a different sort of love, and it's a different sort of passion. I would not want to be Guinevere having to really choose, in the sense that I think Guinevere does love both of them. I don't know that there's ever really an opportunity for her to analyze what her true feelings are for Arthur the man versus Arthur the king. And I think this story does that really well. I think Excalibur, the film, handled that really well as well. And it's one of the reasons why I keep bringing up the film Excalibur with this, just because I think there's elements from that I think clearly play out in this that were really welcome, where it was kind of like, oh, this feels like, to a certain extent, there's a certain amount of a sequel feel to this, yes. To that particular version of the story. What I love about the Arthurian legend is, because it's a legend, and so much of it has been sometimes there's been some attempts to try and pinpoint the reality of any origins of that legend, that sometimes the story's told differently depending on what elements are figured out. I love that this has some form of direct connection to some of my favorite elements of Arthurian legend.
Yeah. Oh, big time. Big time. And again, I love just this sequence when, he goes through, I now pronounce you man and wife. Bang. You're like, oh, dang it. And even just the way it played out perfectly with, Arthur's got the blood on the hands, and then they lay out, and then the doc, runs in and is like, I'm sorry, she's dead. And I'm like, I'm reading this going, they didn't just kill off Guinevere. Come on. And again, it does throw me because I'm like, before you start flipping the pages and you see what happens, there is there is like just that they could do it. Technically, they could. I disagree with the story element, but let's see what happens, because it was one of those weird moments where I was like, I have to find out what happens. I must know now. You can't kill off Guinevere.
So we've got an invasion now of the aliens, kind of trying to come in and further infiltrate and start taking out some of the Knights of the Round Table. You sit there and every one of them starts to feel very human. Yeah. Where now they're going up against a threat that has planned for them. This was a well-calculated attack to try and take down not only the king, but the knights, and eliminate a threat to Morgan Le Fay.
Yeah.
And I really loved seeing how this was and it's the right time in the story. We're at the halfway point where now we've got to really make them. They were vulnerable before because of the descent of their group. Now there's a different level of vulnerability in what's happening here. Lancelot's like, hey, she can't die. I can't let that die. This day was meant for life. This day, and he's recognizing the importance of this marriage too, and what these two as a couple do as a symbol for everybody. So he's showing his loyalty right there. And yes, there's a love element to it for her, of course, that is driving it. But he also loves Camelot and the idea of Camelot and the spirit of what they're doing. There's a loyalty there to him. And it really is where some of these stories you sit there and go, what makes a tragic story? And it's when you look at stuff like this and go, wow, talk about tragic and talk about noble. And we can debate for hours the truth of how they really should handle their relationships. You wonder, would the end result be any different? And I don't know. And that's where it's a compelling story, right? When you see sequences like this and you go, I just don't know.
Dude brought her back from the dead. That is power. That is the true power of love. Yeah. And I love that. And again, it was something that when I was reading this sequence, I was like, this day was meant for life, not death. This should not be. I pray it will not be. Take my breath, make it hers. Still my heart, but quicken hers. Take my life, but let her return. And I was like, oh, that is awesome. And I'll tell you, I just love this sequence. And then and I especially love the look on her face, the look on his face, and then the look of just like Arthur, like, oh my God kind of moment. And I'm just like, oh, this so dooms them. I love the sequence, but I was like, this is so not going to be good for the love triangle.
The battle between Percival and Tristan, and who turns out to be, it was what was inside that tube, right, earlier? That was Owen McAllister being converted into this creature. What an incredible battle sequence that leads to Morgan's next chess move, Isolde coming back and being that secretary. Again, another reason for Tristan to want to be a man again. What a way to twist the knife even further.
But also the fact that it was Tristan's physical form was unable to defeat, the blob guy,
Yeah.
And because it was her weapon, her bomb that was going to go off, but she dropped it out of her hand. And it was Tom who picks it up and throws it. So Tom had to save her. And I love the fact that, it adds to the pain, they're going through about how wasn't physically strong enough. She just has a body of a woman. And I love just that notion going through her head about this, because again, it is to this knight, who's not adjusted, who's not looking, who sees, the form that they've been given as a hindrance and not as a benefit, because they're used to how they lived their life before. And then just as things are getting worse, oh yeah, bring back your long lost love. Like, oh man, this is, again, Morgan Le Fay is absolutely brilliant when it comes to this stuff, man. I love this.
Yeah, it totally sets up, wanting to follow this through. And we're only at the halfway point of this incredible story. Yeah. I'm really glad that we did this one, because it's something where I always wanted to read this story because I heard good things about it, but it's really something different than anything we've done on the podcast before. And that always is compelling to me too, because, at the end, we're 16 years in, and it's always fun to add something else to our catalog for our listeners where, hey, if you've been missing this story. And the nice part is this is pretty accessible right now. I mean, easy to get to. For anybody that's got the DC Infinite app, you can grab it that way. You can pick it up at comic shops. You can pick it up at conventions. You can pick it up, online. It's easy to pick up. Nowadays it's easy to do, eBay and bookstores and things like that and be able to grab them as well. So, and it's on Comixology, so it's easy enough to grab this thing. And I'm glad that we're doing this particular story. And thank you for, when I threw this one out, thank you for being open to doing it, because I am so enjoying this. I feel like a kid again. To be able to, and why I say that is, it's nice to be able to go back to an era where it's like, geez, I wanted to read this back in the day. Yeah. And then it's another one of those things when we talk about stockpiles and stories that you want to read. There's so many books that I want to read. This was one that I've always wanted to put on the bucket list of something to read. Yep. And I'm so glad we're getting to this right now. What a fun experience.
Oh, God, yeah. And I'm using, just so everybody knows, I'm using the Infinite app for this. I'm 100% did not buy it through Comixology, and I've never owned it. So this, if you have, Infinite app, it's right there, readily accessible, easy to read. Even, because it's funny, I normally read the Infinite app on the computer. I don't read it on iZilla. Mm-hmm. But when we record, I use iZilla. So I had to figure out how to get it on iZilla and do it, all that stuff. And me in tech, I'm like, how am I doing this? I almost called you, but I'm like, you know what, Jim, you got to figure this out. And I was able to. So I was able to actually download it to the iPad and get it going and read it on there. And so it's kind of neat for me to have better access to the Infinite app, instead of going through my computer, actually having it on iZilla.
You make an interesting point about that, too, as we kind of wrap up, and you talk about, for people that are maybe traditionally paper readers that maybe have DC Infinite now, and to your point, aren't as, and I'm going to put quotes around this, aren't as techy. Your advice there is, and actually, I don't know if you're consciously giving advice there, but I think one of the things that you did is exactly the difference between what makes somebody techie and what doesn't. It's just the willingness to try, and trust yourself to go, I'm not going to break it. Because the difference usually between somebody who's more techie and somebody who's not, and you handled it in a very techie way, so you're a lot more techie than you give yourself credit for. It was just trying and realize that there's nothing I can break here. I'm just going to figure it out. I'm going to play around with it until I do. That's how you adapt to a new platform. So great advice. And so what has the experience been like for reading it on DC Infinite? Because I'll admit, I did this one on Comixology. I bought it on Comixology. And the reason why I did it is I wanted one of us to be able to read the trade with the forward, if I'm making any sense. So I bought the collected edition just for that. I was hoping you'd kind of do it this way to talk about the DC Infinite app. So with a 12-issue series, reading it through this app, comfort level and enjoyment level of reading it through that method versus paper or Comixology, which you're more, I would say you're more used to. Would that be fair?
Oh, big time. Yeah, and I'll take completely same kind of groove as I'm feeling with Amazology. If I had actually purchased it that way, it's the, yeah. If you're comfortable with the digital, it's the same kind of setup. You gotta push this button instead of push that one, and at the end of the book, you gotta hit this X instead of hit this close book instead of what you have to you gotta click on done and stuff like that. But it's the actual usage of it, zoom in, zoom out, that kind of stuff. All that, everything to me is just normal digital read. Everything that I'm comfortable with. And it was kind of nice because the way I was reading this was I did my normal before I start work and at the end of work read an issue. And then as it started getting in the groove, I started reading more than just one issue. I've read all 12 issues already because I'm like, oh, I got to see what happens. I got to see what happens to this person. Oh, I can't stop now. There have been a couple of days where I started work a little bit later than normal because I was reading a comic book, and I had to forcibly put it down. So 100% comfortable. Now, it's funny, you do mention something, and I think, next time I'm at a comic shop, or if we ever are able to start going to shows again, I'm going to look for this in a collected edition.
I own it. Yeah. And so it's one of those things where they released it as a hardcover during our tenure podcasting. And I'm going to look for that. I bought it then. The only reason why I did it digital for this was because of exactly what you're saying. It's easier to have the digital in front of me when we do these type of recordings. So I bought it on Comixology for that reason. It wasn't a matter of digital versus paper. It just winds up, it's easier for podcasting to not be shuffling pages and things like that. So that's my only reason. I like owning, like you, I like owning the paper collected edition and having it that way. There's something about the colors and the way that art, particularly this Brian Boland artwork in a collected edition, you got me every time.
Yeah, and again, it's funny. The other day I was thinking about it, how much I read now digital versus how much I read paper. Mm-hmm. And I really read 100% more digitally than I do paper. Even the books that I get paper, I still, will read them digitally, just because of the ease and convenience of reading it on the iPad and all that stuff. And, the Infinite app, because it does have, it is a couple, months behind what's currently out there on like the ongoing stories. For the podcast, it wouldn't work for everything we do, but for stuff like this, it works. And again, I there's been times with some of the older stuff, as I said, I've used it, so now I can even do a little bit better, diving some of that stuff. Because what I'll do is I'll sit downstairs, hanging out with Dad, and like during the Browns season when we're watching, the Browns play, and I did air quotes around the word play, I'll have the iPad with me, and when the game starts getting bored, Dad will start falling asleep, and I'll start reading comics, So this ad, again, by getting more comfortable with this app now, it's expanding when I can and can't use and where I'll be able to read and stuff like that. So I'm very glad I decided to do it this way, and I'm glad we're doing this thing because as I said before, I really I'd sit at my computer, go to the website, and I'd read, I'm like, I'm going to read some old classic Superman, or I'm going to read some Wonder Woman, or let me read some of the original Suicide Squad stuff, and I'll go really old school books, and that's the only thing I was using it for. I wasn't using it for anything, else, and this has kind of opened up the door for me.
Yeah. I can't wait to talk about the second half of this, and
yes,
we'll be talking about issue 7 through 12 next episode.
There they are, all alone except for that old character.
I would like to remind everyone about our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434 or Dr. Norge on Skype. We love having you part of our show. RagingBullets.com is our show website. If you're looking to contact us that way, you'll find out information about brand new episodes. It feeds into Twitter. It feeds into our Facebook fan page. RagingBullets@gmail.com is our email address if you prefer to contact us through that method. We are proud to be part of an amazing Facebook group community that has gone through 2 iterations, and actually both still exist. The current one, I want to thank all of the people that post there regularly and keep me up to date on, and they really do keep me up to date on the news and happenings over at DC Comics. And throughout comics and pop culture, it's a safe, fun spot, and I want to thank everyone who's participated, not just now, but all through the years. We've been very lucky in that we've had a lot of loyalty and people that have listened to this podcast, supported the show. The About Us section is where you're going to find out details about how to contact Jim and myself directly on social media and in gaming platforms, because we love to connect with you. We are sponsored, as always, as I mentioned, by DCB Service and InStockTrades.com. And I want to thank them for continuing to support us over these past 16 years of podcasting, just because of the fact that they've helped offset our costs. And they've been really a great supporter of the comics podcasting community. So please consider checking out both of those websites. And Jim, our next episode, we are going to be back taking a look at issues 7 through 12 as we wrap up our 2-part discussion of Camelot 3000. We will see you next week.
Bye.
All right, you guys. Are you ready to sing your song?
I'd say we are. Yeah, let's sing it now.
Okay, this should be fun. Now get ready for your cue. Okay, Sean?
Okay.
Okay, Jim? Jim? Jim!
Okay. Raging Bullets time is here. We talk about what we hold dear. Comic books and TV shows. Superheroes and their clothes. Justice League and so much more. I just love Green Lantern Corps. We talk about the books we've read with spoilers straight ahead.
Okay, fellas, get ready. That was very good, Sean.
Naturally.
Jim, you're a little flat there, so be careful. Jim? Jim? Jim!
Okay. Justice League and so much more. I still love Green Lantern Corps. DC Comics are what we know. The Raging Bullet Show. DC Comics are what we know. The Raging Bullet Show.
Excellent job, guys.
Let's sing it again. Yeah, let's sing it again.
No, that's enough. Let's not push it.
Push it. What is that? Yeah, what are you talking about?
No, I didn't
What
mean
are you
anything
trying
by
to say?
that.
I think
Sean,
we did it right
Jim,
now. Like, I don't know.
how long do you want the song to go?
Look, it's our production.